Luke, are we ready? Like everybody's good to go? Okay. All right. Okay, welcome to the City Council meeting. The City Council has returned from question, and there are no portable actions. And so we will now call to order the regular session of the meeting, and Council members to lead us in a pledge to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Fonzie?
Here.
Councilmember Funk? Here. Councilmember Newsom?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Bordeaux?
Here.
Mayor Moreno?
Here.
All present.
Thank you. I would like to welcome all the members in our audience, and if you're watching or listening to the City Council meeting tonight, we welcome you. If you would like to speak during the time that's set aside for community forum or during public comment for any of the items on our agenda and you are not in the audience this evening, please do call 805-538-2888 to provide public comment via phone. When you do call, let us know which item on the agenda you're wishing to speak or if it is community forum. Once again, that number is 805-538-2888. Let's see, we'll now go on to approval of the agenda. With this, we will waive the reading in full of all ordinances appearing on this agenda, and the titles of the ordinances will be read aloud by the city clerk at the first reading after the motion and before the city council votes. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
I have a motion by Councilmember Fonzie, a second by Councilmember Funk. I'm noticing that Councilmember Newsom is going to have to be like 3 steps ahead of anyone to make a motion.
There's a timing delay too, so give me a little bit to respond to.
We will do that. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Fonzie?
Yes.
Councilmember Funk?
Yes.
Councilmember Newsom?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Bordeaux?
Yes.
Mayor Moreno?
Yes, ma'am.
5-0, motion passes.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the consent calendar. The consent calendar contains items that are considered routine and non-controversial by staff and be moved in one motion unless accounts or a member of the public wish to pull an item. So we'll first ask, are there any members of the council wishing to pull an item? Seeing none, is there any member here wishing an item? And I will ask to have anyone call Luke. No, and I'll ask the city manager, did we receive anything email?
We did not.
Thank you. With that, I'll ask for a motion on approval of the calendar.
So moved.
A second.
I have a motion by Councilmember Funk, a second by Mayor Pro Tem Bordeaux. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Funk?
Yes.
Councilmember Newsom?
Yes.
Councilor Pro Tem Bordeaux?
Yes.
Mayor Moreno?
Yes, ma'am.
5-0, motion passes.
Thank you. Next are the updates from city manager.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. I want to talk about something. We have a lot going on right now, but don't want to forget about fire and our very real wildland air threat. Now, as is usually the case in our area, the very real threat of wildfire is extremely high, and everyone must do everything they can to help keep our community fire safe. We want everybody to be able to enjoy safe, legal, and fire-free 4th of July. So we are reminding us that all fireworks are illegal in Atascadero. Anyone caught within the city limits lighting any fireworks, even the safe and sane versions, be cited and fined. Reality is all fireworks have the potential to cause a wildfire, even safe and sane fireworks like sparklers, fountains, and smoke bombs. With the potential of significant fire activity, this everyone is being cautioned to avoid any activity of fire. It's important to know that anyone found responsible for starting a fire caused by the use of any type of fireworks can be responsible for any cause, property damage, fire suppression, may be charged with a felony. That liability also applies to parents of juveniles who are found to be responsible for causing a fire. We encourage they already have some fireworks and they're putting them into the fire department without fear of penalty or prosecution, so that the fire can be safe. We do realize that enjoying the 4th of July, usual summertime local events, is that we're all looking for ways to try to get back to a little bit of and to be able to safely enjoy time with our friends, neighbors, and families. But the usual large community displays of fireworks won't be held anywhere in the county this year. 19 safety restrictions still don't allow for these types of fireworks. That doesn't mean we can try and replace them with our own fireworks at home, not even the safe and sane versions, at least not in the city of Atascadero. Hopefully by this time next year, we'll all be back to a much more normal situation and we'll be able to safely enjoy our 4th of July holiday with traditional activity gatherings once again. It has already been a very busy fire season here on the Central Coast. We had a scary fire in Paso Robles yesterday that threatened a lot of homes. We had a very, again, scary year in Atascadero a couple of weeks ago. The property owners had abated whole property, which gave fire teams the time to fight these fires. Everything we can do to help not start fires and prevent them from spreading quickly is critical this year, as it is with every year. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that council has.
Thank you, Ms. Rickard. Any questions from the council? Seeing none, we will move on to our community forum. This is the portion of the meeting that is reserved for persons who wish to address the council in any manner that is not on the agenda, but over which the council has jurisdiction. Comments made during public will become a topic of discussion. We may direct staff to come back with something or to address something. We don't generally, or we are not allowed to have a discussion on items. Comments made are limited to 3 minutes, and a total of 30 minutes will be reserved for public comment. And with that, we will open up to our first speaker. Welcome.
Good evening, Council. Jeff Osland, business owner, resident of Atascadero. A few things. With the fire in Paso yesterday, I'm sure it's going to be determined that it is related to the population in the creek bed, whether it was the homeless themselves or the landscape crew that was cleaning up the creek to prevent fires. It is a concern for Atascadero if we're pushing people from Paso to Atascadero like we did last year when they went in to clean up. I don't know what tools we have in our tool chest here to prevent more folks coming to Atascadero and congregating on City Hall, in the sunken gardens around town, and causing more issues. We have enough problems as it is. I am compassionate for those that are struggling on homeless, but a lot of these are, users and have other problems. We were having a meeting yesterday and we had a lot of vulgar language brought up, and I had to step in and move one along in Atascadero. So I'm concerned that we're going to get the Paso infiltration into the city of Atascadero again. So I bring that up now. If there's some way that we can have more tools or call an emergency to prevent it with the state. So that's on the fire prevention. As far as our fire and our law enforcement goes in town, we're lucky. We have a very good staff on both ends that responds and does a great job. And they did a great job with the shooting. They did a great job and keeping us safe. Obviously, a great job getting on that fire at the last council meeting. I think is when it broke out. They did a great job. So thank you for that. On another note, I have a question regarding waste management. My question is, I know the city from council asked the city staff to renegotiate a new contract with waste management. My two questions are, how is that progress going? And is there a reason we're not opening it up to an RFP for other companies? That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public wishing to speak? Seeing none, I will ask Luke, do we have anyone on the phone that is wishing to provide public comment for community forum? We have a what?
Hi,
Oh, okay.
my name is Tori Queen, and I would like to ask the City Council of Atascadero to support Race Matters demands in our jurisdiction, adopt a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis, and connect and collaborate with organizations in our city who work on diversity, inclusion, equity, and racial justice. I think that this is a very important thing for our city to do. We are small, but we can make a change for the better, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Keene. Next speaker. Thank you, Luke. And I will ask Ms. Rickard any public comment that you would share with us from email.
We had several public comments that we did receive by email. I believe that Amanda will be reading them into the record. So we'll have Luke patch her in.
Thank you. I am here. And once we're ready, I'd be happy to read those emails.
Go right ahead, Amanda.
Thank you. The first one was from Layla Daniel. Hi there. My name is Layla Daniel, and I live in SLO County. I am writing to make sure you are committed to fighting racism in our community. You need to reallocate funds from law enforcement and incarceration to fund community services, mental health, and community nonprofits. Our community needs this funding. Law enforcement officers should not be dealing with any issues other than crime, with sufficient training, functioning body cameras, and only from support of the Black community. Resources need to be allocated to mental health and social workers so they can support their community members. Over and over again, we see law enforcement hurting and killing our Black and brown brothers and sisters. The system was meant to control people of color, and so it is our job to dismantle that system and rebuild something that makes sense for all of us. Support Race Matters demands in your jurisdiction. Adopt a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis. Also, as a city council, connect and collaborate with organizations in Atascadero who work on diversity, inclusion, equity, and/or racial justice. Thank you for your time, Layla Daniel. The next email that we have is from Sophie Stebbins. Hello, I am writing to demand that Atascadero City Council hears the voices and demands of our Black community. I am asking that the City Council supports Race Matters SLO demands in their jurisdiction, adopts a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis, connects and collaborates with organizations who work on diversity, inclusion, equity, and/or racial justice. The citizens of SLO County are asking for a response and swift action regarding racial justice. Thank you, Sophie Stebbins. The next email we have is from Karina Smith. Mayor Moreno and members of the Atascadero City Council. My name is Karina Smith, and I was born and raised in Atascadero. I urge you to 1, support Race Matters demands within Atascadero. 2, adopt a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis. And 3, connect and collaborate with organizations in Atascadero who work on diversity, inclusion, equity, or racial justice. There are no Black people represented on the Atascadero City Council. but you all represent the city of Atascadero, including our Black residents. So what are you doing to ensure their safety? What are you doing to confront the racism they have faced? How are you eliciting and elevating their voices using your platform? The 3 aforementioned requests are a good place to begin. Combating racism ought to be at the forefront of our city's agendas. Otherwise, it will taint every item the council reviews, from housing developments to budgets to permits for local events. Either you choose to take actions against it or you continue to foster its existence. Thank you for your work, Karina Smith. The next email we actually received twice from Aline DeLuca and Joseph DeLuca, but because it's an identical email, I think we can just read it once. Dear council members Moreno, Bourbeau, Fonzie, Funk, and Newsom, as a current resident of SLO County and someone who grew up in Atascadero, I am writing to urge you to respond to the demands made by Race Matters SLO County, specifically in the following areas. Adopt a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis. Commit to reading and providing a report on the work that has been done within Atascadero toward the demands listed by Race Matters. Connect and collaborate with organizations within the city who are already working on diversity, inclusion, equity, and racial justice. I write this comment with a renewed sense of urgency as video footage documenting an incident of racial hatred within our community was released during the last week, in which one white community member used hateful and threatening language toward a Black community member in a public and broad daylight in the year 2020. The concern of racism in Atascadero and in SLO County at large is not abstract or nebulous. It is tangible and alive as we speak, and it requires your immediate attention. Please demonstrate your commitment as a governing body to be actively anti-racist and stand in solidarity with your Black community members. Thank you, Aline DeLuca and Joseph DeLuca. Our next email was from Georgia Crowley. Hello, I am writing a public comment addressing systematic racism and oppression in our society. I am demanding that you support all of the Race Matters demands in your jurisdiction. I am writing to demand that you adopt a resolution declaring that racism is a public health crisis. I demand that the city connects and collaborates with individuals who work on diversity, inclusion, equity, or racial justice in order to move forward and implement change that will actually change things. We have been ignoring the deep faults in our system for far too long. We must change. Best, Georgia Crowley. The next email that we received was from Thomas Arndt, Mayor Moreno, and members of the council. My name is Thomas, and I am writing to urge the council to commit to the reforms detailed in the widely circulated Race Matters petition, addressing the pervasive issue of racial violence by police. I think the petition speaks for itself. Please take the time to read it, consider each of the policy recommendations, and direct staff to pursue a formal report on the current state of police reform in Atascadero. I will add one thing. I have heard the rhetoric recently that we in SLO County do not have this issue, and that calls to address racism here are misguided talking points from outside our region. This is not only false, but it also invites a dangerous complacency. Racism is an issue here, as it is across the county, and racism hurts people here just like everywhere else. The recent demonstrations across the county and across the country are a testament to the widespread dissatisfaction we as the public feel over the state of policing. Please heed this call. Thank you for your time, Thomas Arndt. The next email we have is from Raylee Delk. I'm Raylee from Los Osos, and I'm asking the Atascadero City Council to address and respond to the demands of Race Matters SLO. These potential improvements include the reallocating funds from the police department to local mental health services and nonprofits. Additionally, I agree wholeheartedly with the proposed resolution declaring racism a public health crisis, as San Luis Obispo has done. For more information, refer to https://www.racemattersslow.org and connect and collaborate with other organizations in your city who work on diversity, inclusion, equity, and racial justice. Regardless of the degree of racism in Atascadero and SLO County as a whole, such changes could benefit everyone in the community and set an example for the rest of the state and the country. Learn more about the data-driven studies behind these demands at https://www.joincampaignzero.org. Sincerely, Rayleigh Delk. The next email that I have is from Karen Kubarek and Nate Page. We want our voices heard about meeting Race Matters SLO's demands, including appropriate police reform and recognition of racial discrimination as pervasive in our society. Therefore, racism should be declared a public health emergency by Atascadero and every city at the SLO County level. On January 28, 2020, the American Psychological Association published an article written by Zara Abrams titled "Sounding the Alarm on Black Youth Suicide." This article states, between 1991 and 2017, suicide attempts among Black adolescents increased by 73%, while attempts among white youth decreased, according to an analysis of more than 198,000 high school students nationwide. Lindsay M.A. et al. Pediatrics, Volume 144, Number 5, 2019. Other studies have shown an elevated risk of suicide among African American boys ages 5 to 11. Bridge, J.A.E.T. Alt. JAMA Pediatrics, Volume 172, Number 7, 2018. Across the board, mental health problems such as depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder put youth at risk for suicidal thoughts and attempts. But many African American children and adolescents face additional challenges, including exposure to violent racial discrimination that may further increase their risks, says Sherry Molick, PhD, Associate Professor of Psychology at the George Washington University in the District of Columbia, and a member of the working group. Black youth are also less likely than their white peers to receive care for depression, and when they do enter treatment, it's often through the juvenile justice system. Another article, Racism is a Public Health Crisis, Say Cities and Counties, posted on June 15, 2020, on www.pewtrusts.org by Christine Vessel, says Black women are up to 4 times more likely to die of pregnancy-related complications than white women. Black men are more than twice as likely to be killed by police as white men, and the average life expectancy of African Americans is 4 years lower than the rest of the U.S. population. These racial disparities are heartbreaking and frightening. We need to do better to dismantle racism on a systematic level. Racism is a public health crisis, and it is imperative for Atascadero and San Luis Obispo County to step up and acknowledge this so all members of the community may feel supported and safe. Karen Kubarek and Nate Page, Morro Bay. And our last public comment by email is from Michael Enns. I want to thank the Atascadero Mayor, Heather Moreno, City Manager, Rochelle Rickard, City Clerk Laura Christensen, and others that have been involved in the increase of public information about local reopening activities from the COVID-19 restrictions. It has been confusing and frustrating to know what changes are happening and what is allowed to open, and steps or restrictions that they still need to maintain. More important, What are we as citizens able to do in places where we are able to go? From the restrictions from the federal level down to the city, information has been hard to understand and follow. I also want to say thank you to Chief of Police Gerald Haley and Fire Chief Casey Bryson for the work of the first responders to keep our community safe. With all of the events of the past few weeks, it is very comforting to live in a city where departments have staff ready to quickly react to potentially dangerous situations. Michael ends. And that is the last of our emails for public comment.
Thank you, Amanda. And we have we have a few minutes left, so I will ask Luke, is there anyone who's called in?
Hi, my name is Ryan Gelston. I live here in Atascadero, just down the street from City Hall, actually. I'm asking, as several people it seems have, that you address Race Matters Slow's list of demands and their petition. Their petition really isn't that long. It's about 1 page. And as a part of their petition, they ask that you review this document, A Vision for Black Lives, Policy Demands for Black Power, Freedom, and Justice. And this document is 22 pages total in length. Most of those, or a good number of those pages, are blank. There's only 12 pages of text, or 12 pages where there's substantive amounts of text on it, with 5 pages of glossary. This has been out for well over a week, and I'm sure that going and being on city council takes a good amount of time, and that your attention is focused on other things. But when we have and have had a systemic problem in this country for literally centuries, it's mildly insulting that Atascadero City Council can't take the hour or two required to review the document and send off at least a letter saying that they'll further review the document and further comment and respond to it. It's kind of surprising. So yes, I ask that please respond to Race Matters Slow's list of demands. That's all that they're asking for. Currently, there are about 6,900 signatories on the petition. And that you try to address this issue in Atascadero, because there are major problems that happen here. You need go no farther than cross East Mall Drive to see the homeless encampment. We need to assure that they have essential services, that they have access to mental and physical health care, that they have access to food, and that hopefully in the future, I know that that you've recently approved a major low-income housing development, but we need to assure that if they desire and want to, that they have access to housing. I think that these are very basic things that everyone deserves as a part of being human. Anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other speakers, Luke? We still have a few minutes. No speakers. All right. Any other emails that have come in, Rochelle?
We are checking. Hold on. No
There are not.
additional emails.
No additional emails. All right. Thank you very much. We'll go ahead and close community forum. Bring that back to council to address the items that were brought up just ever so briefly. Mr. Oslin, yes, we too are very appreciative of our public safety, both from a police and fire perspective, especially in the last week and all that they've been having to deal with. So thank you for your comments there. With regards to the people coming from Paso down to here, and I think we're all concerned about that same issue and something that staff is looking into. And so if you'd like to have that conversation, please let us know. We certainly looked to our community last year to help with that, and we may need that again. With regards to waste management, I understand we are talking to you as well in getting a conversation together. The progress of the contract, we can let you know about that as well. I don't know that that's anything we can really talk about tonight. It's not on our...
I can speak with Mr. Oslin afterwards.
Perfect. And then let's see, and Mr. Enns, we will talk about COVID-19. I do understand the restrictions and all the issues are very confusing, and I don't know that we can make it less confusing, but we do have that later on in our agenda, and so we will talk about that. And then to the number of individuals who wrote in or called in regarding Slow Race Matters, and one particular individual that found it very insulting and surprising that we couldn't take the time to respond. You will be very happy to know that we did respond last week. We responded and we said we would like to sit down with you. We want to engage with you. We want to, I think some of the terms that are being used, connect and collaborate. We want to find out what's important to you. Let's talk about Atascadero specifically. Let's sit down, myself as mayor, one of our council members, and actually I would ask Council Member Funk if she would, I'm getting the nod from her, would be willing to be one of the council members sitting with us, city manager, and discussing this. So we do want to have that engagement, and I again put that out that we are ready and willing to sit down anytime. So I want to assure our community that we do take the concerns seriously. We have reached out and we are waiting to hear back, but we're continuing to be here and engage. So thank you very much for that. I think any of us are happy to sit down with anyone individually. It's hard as a body. We're not allowed to do that. I think the 5 of us would love to sit down with a group and say, hey, let's talk about these issues. And unfortunately, because of the Brown Act for Political Practices Commission, we are not allowed to do that legally. So we can't. But I think it's really important that all of us listen. This affects our community and different people in our community in different ways. And so we need to get input from a lot of different places, and we need to move judiciously. We don't jump into something and just start, taking demands or suggestions and putting them right into policy. I think that's where we can get into trouble with things and look back and say, oh, wait, we should have taken a more methodical and slower approach and gotten input from a wide group of people. And so I think that's really important to keep in mind, and that is how your government works. Government works by all of us coming together. It's not a select few. We are not the select few that are here to decide what's best for you. It's all of us as a community that decide what's best for our community. And so we need that input from everyone. So I thank all of you who took the time to call in tonight. We do take these concerns seriously, and we look forward to hearing back from Slow Race Matters and meeting with them. And with that, we will move on to our public hearings. Our first one is the Atascadero Tourism Business Improvement District confirmation of the annual assessment for fiscal year 2020-21. I will start by asking if we've had any ex parte communication. Just kind of looking, anyone ex parte? No, say no, none myself. And we will move on to our Deputy City Manager, Terry Vanish, for this presentation.
I've been tagged, it's me.
Oh, wonderful.
The item you have before you is the Atascadero Tourism Business Improvement District confirmation of annual assessment. You guys will be very familiar with this. It does come before you each and every year. You do need to take this step in order for the lodging owners to assess themselves the additional 2% that they assess. So the lodging owners have asked that they assess themselves 2%. That money is spent on marketing, promotion, and tourism activities, basically tourism attraction to Atascadero, with the idea to encourage people to stay here in Atascadero. You did have an item with a notice of intent to assess at your last meeting, and this is the final step that you would need to take in order to assess that for fiscal year 2020-2021. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the council? Seeing none, I will ask if there is any public comment. There's nobody here in person. I will ask Luke, is there anybody on the phone that is wishing to provide public comment on this item? Ms. Rickard, anybody via email that has provided comment?
We did not receive any comments by email.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back for a motion.
I'll move that council adopt the draft resolution.
I'll second.
Heather Newsom already got you. I got her hand raised. So I'm going to take that from Heather there. We got a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Borbota, second by Councilmember Newsom. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Newsom,
Yes.
Councilmember Funk,
Yes.
Councilmember Fonzie,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Borbo,
Yes.
Mayor Moreno.
Yes, ma'am.
5-0, motion passes.
Thank you. On to item number 2 of our public hearing. This is the Downtown Parking and Business Improvement Area Confirmation of Annual Assessment Fiscal Year 2020-2021. I will ask if there's any ex parte. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and go to our city manager for the report.
Thank you. Again, this is very similar to the app bid assessment that you just had. This is something that we need to do every year. We were approached a few years ago, I think in 2018, by the Downtown Business District, and they wanted to resurrect the annual assessment. Once upon a time, we had an assessment. We ended that assessment at the request of the landlords. And then the Downtown Business Association or group came back and asked for this assessment. This is an assessment that is equal to their annual business license fee. For most of the businesses, they're looking at an annual fee of around $50 per year. This would change that business license fee from $50 to $100. $50 would go into the Downtown Business Improvement District, and the other $50 would be the regular business license fee. The monies collected from this district can only be spent in the district for promotional and infrastructure, basically for the idea of promoting and garnering businesses to those downtown businesses. The Chamber of Commerce is the advisory board for the Downtown Business Improvement District. We must have an advisory board. Basically, they hear from the groups of owners. Their board then approves what they're going to do, and we contract with the chamber. This, like the app bid, was on your last agenda, so you had information, you're very familiar with it. This is the final step to be able to assess in fiscal year 2021, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Do we have any questions, council? Seeing none, we will open it up to public comment. And are there any, there's no audience members in person. Are there any members of the public on the phone? No. Anything via email? No. We will go ahead, as there are no comments, close public comment and bring it back for council comments or a motion.
I move approval. I'll second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Fonzie, a second by Councilmember Funk. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Fonzie,
Yes.
Councilmember Funk,
Yes.
Councilmember Newsom,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Borbo,
Yes.
Mayor Moreno.
Yes, ma'am.
5-0, motion passes.
Thank you. On to public hearing number 3. This is adopting the sewer service charges that are to be added to the 2020-2021 property tax rolls. Do we have any ex parte communication? Seeing none, we will go ahead and turn this over to our Public Works Director, Mr. Nick DeBar, for the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Moreno. Welcome, or good evening, City Council. Bear with me here. This is always a challenge, it seems like. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So the item tonight before the City Council is a public hearing to receive objections to the sewer service charges being placed on customers' tax levy on their property tax statements. The City of Atascadero is a little unique. We do not provide water, so we do not charge sewer service charges based on winter consumption of water. Instead, we have fixed rates, and these charges are collected annually with the property taxes. For fiscal year 2021, there are 5,497 parcels that are being levied, and the total amount to be collected on the tax rolls is $2,781,430. Sewer service charges appear as ATAS sewer charge on the property tax statements, and the deadline is July 15th for the city to submit to have them collected on the next fiscal year property tax statement. And the county adds $2 to each levy that the city places. This is a table that shows kind of the categories and what the annual and monthly sewer service charges are. The city recently did increase these charges, and the annual amount is reflected in these amounts. And these are go into effect on July 1st, so next year will be this rate for the 12 months. Just wanted to show this. We've all seen this once or twice before, but sewer rates still are among the lowest in the county for wastewater collection districts. So the recommendations tonight is to conduct a public hearing to receive verbal testimony regarding the public or the proposed sewer service charges to be levied upon property tax rolls. And then 2, to adopt the draft resolution approving the sewer service charges to be added to the 2020-21 property tax rolls. And with that, I can take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. DeBar. Do we have any council questions? Councilmember Funk?
Yeah, just to clarify, the council had a special meeting on the 1st of June, and that was to approve the rates. And now this meeting is to approve placing those rates on the property tax rolls. Do I understand that correctly?
That is correct.
Two-step process. Got it.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we will go to public comment. There is nobody here in person. I will ask you, we have any members of the public wishing to comment on the phone, Luke? No members on the phone. Anyone via email?
We did not as of the beginning of the meeting.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you very much. So we will close public comment and bring that back to council for a motion.
I'll move approval of the draft resolution as stated in our packet.
A second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Funk, a second by Councilmember Newsom. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Funk,
Yes?
Councilmember Newsom,
Yes.
Councilmember Fonzie,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Borbeau,
Yes.
Mayor Moreno.
Yes, ma'am.
5-0 motion passes.
Thank you. I am thinking that even though we're only 45 minutes in, we might want to just, with the masks and everything, take a quick break because our next item is going to be like the most significant one of the night, and we might just need a quick break to breathe and get some water. This is so uncomfortable. Anyway, but it smells like roses in here, I'll just tell you that. Anyway, let's just take maybe a 5-minute break or so, and we'll be right back. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Genevieve.
Hello.
We'll be on in just a minute. Looks like it came up a lot faster than I thought.
Yeah, I don't see an option to share my screen, but I think Luke will give that to me in a minute.
Yeah, I think he will. I think he'll do that. Yes, I know you. I know they can all hear us, Kelly. It's okay. We're out. Kelly just texted me, "Hey, we can all hear you." So yeah, we can't. We are online live here, so just making sure we're aware of that. But anyway, all right, we'll get started here in a minute. I'm sure we'll have a screen sharing option for you.
There we go. Thank you.
Look at that. You're up on the screen, Genevieve.
I am. Hi.
Luke will need to allow Genevieve to share her screen because she'll be running the presentation. So if she's able to do that.
It's showing the wrong screen is all. May have an option.
Looks good.
Great, thanks, Phil.
All right, we will start coming back together here. I'm going to ask everybody to move towards the dais and we will get started. All right. So let's see, our city manager. Luke, do I need to give you like a, hey, we're getting going again, or are we're going? Okay, wonderful. Thank you anyone who's watching for bearing with us as we're doing kind of semi-in-person, semi-virtual, figuring all of this out. So we will, coming back from a break here and moving to our one and only management report, which is our 6th cycle housing element update draft plan. And our, sorry here, I'm not supposed to be touching my face, I know. We've got our Community Development Director, Phil Densmore, to be making the presentation for this item.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight we have our first opportunity to take a look at the very first draft of our housing element and get into some of the actual policies and programs and take a look at some of what we've been working on as we draft this document. Now, it's really important to keep note that tonight we're not actually taking an action, but we're taking comments, we're looking at the language, and then we're going to be reviewing this document with the state, and then we'll get additional opportunities to take a look at these policies and take a look at the entire document itself. But essentially, this initiates the process for public review, initiates the process for state review, and is our first good opportunity to take a look at the language and go through some items. What I'm going to do here in just a moment is reintroduce Genevieve Sharo. She's been the consultant that's been working with us and working with the community and the public. Our last presentation to you was about the housing inventory and the number of units we need to do and where those units can fit. Since we've gone through that, this is now a discussion of the actual programs and some actual details. So Genevieve is going to carry you through that presentation. We're going to go and touch upon some of the more notable programs in there. And then we're going to go back to those programs a second time because we know we want to talk about some of the more notable ones and get into some of that language. But we'll do that after we go through a basic overview of those programs and a basic overview of the process and what we've done so far in terms of public participation. And then, of course, we'll end with a timeline and next steps. So, introducing Genevieve Sharo. She is our consultant that's been working with this process. Good evening, Genevieve.
Good evening. Thank you, Phil, and good evening, Mayor and Council and members of the virtual audience. The presentation that we have for you tonight is going to go through some of the housing element requirements, which we've covered previously, but want to just hit on those again, discuss the public participation process that the city undertook for the process, and go through the draft housing element, what the components of the draft document are, and what are some of those notable programs that Phil mentioned that we'll want to discuss in more detail with folks tonight. And then just give you an update on the timeline and next steps for the project. So the housing element is a state required element of the general plan, and it's actually the only general plan element that is required to be reviewed and then so-called certified by a state agency. And that state agency is the Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD. I'm going to try and limit the alphabet soup, but HCD is one of the ones that might fall out of my mouth one more time. Along with the next item, the RHNA. The housing element implements the RHNA, or the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. And this RHNA establishes the total number of housing units that every jurisdiction throughout the state has to plan for over the planning period. And this planning period is between 2021 and 2028, an 8-year planning cycle. And each jurisdiction's housing element must show that adequate zoning exists in the community to accommodate that regional housing need allocation. So this is very clearly outlined in quite a bit of legislation regarding updates to housing elements and housing element content. And it all rests on the legislative intent that that housing is of vital statewide importance, and that local and state governments have a responsibility to facilitate housing development for all economic segments of the community. So periodic updates to housing elements are required by state law. One of the only elements that does so require. This is the 6th cycle, they call it, of housing elements. So the 5th update, I suppose. And this update is due December 31st for the San Luis Obispo region. If it's adopted on time, the housing element can be valid for 8 years. If it's not adopted on time, there is a 4-year update penalty, along with some other potential constraints. So the city began the housing element update with a community workshop in January, which was attended by local developers and service providers, housing advocates, and residents. And the group discussed the need to see housing as an opportunity, while understanding the importance of considering the local jobs housing balance. So participants came up with good recommendations and really talked through some of the local issues, recommended streamlining development, the approval process, certain reductions in fees that they hoped for, and a focus really on making Atascadero attractive for the building community and seeing housing as an opportunity. Following the workshop, the Planning Commission and City Council held a joint study session to report on that input that was received at the workshop and discuss housing issues and solutions and potential locations for new housing. On April 14th, the City Council conducted another study session to discuss potential sites to meet the RHNA and some of the significant policies that could be considered for the housing element. And those sites and those policies that were discussed back in April are included in the draft housing element that's available for public review tonight. And then tonight's council hearing, as Phil mentioned, is really an opportunity to provide the public and the decision makers with a chance to look at these the draft language and provide feedback, make edits, before we send this up to the state HCD to work through the review process with them. So drawing from that legislative intent, the housing element is really a comprehensive community statement about what the housing needs are and what are those actions that are necessary to meet those needs at all income levels. So the housing element specifically looks to assess and address constraints and impediments to housing development. It also discusses particular housing needs and reviews the progress that you've achieved since the last housing element. But fundamentally, the goal is to guide housing policy for the city, as well as to identify those opportunities to meet the city's RHNA. So the housing element is an update. The intent of the goals and policies from the previous housing element are largely the same. But there are a few notable programs, and those largely focus on these two kind of concepts. The first is a look at higher density housing. And so this is because to meet the RHNA, parcels that are zoned for higher density are assumed to be able to meet the lower income RHNAs. And this is because affordable housing, it's assumed, can find economies of scale in those higher density sites. And the second focus is to comply with state laws. The legislature has adopted many laws over the last 4 or 5 years to really encourage housing production throughout the state. And this housing element outlines the measures that are necessary to comply with state law. So the document has, let's see, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 chapters. We start with the introduction, and this outlines the format of the document and reviews the public participation and the public comments that were received to date. And then chapter B, it's really the heart of the plan of the housing element. The housing plan includes the goals, the policies, and those implementing actions to address any constraints and really move forward the housing policy for the community for this next 8-year period. Chapter C is the regional chapter. This is a new chapter. It's unique to this San Luis Obispo County region, developed communally between the 7 jurisdictions in the county to really articulate what the regional vision is for housing and to support collaborative efforts towards housing and infrastructure development. Chapter D is the needs assessment. In this chapter, we look at demographic trends, the housing market, costs of housing, and particular needs of special needs groups as they pertain to housing. Chapter E is a review of constraints to housing development. And these range from governmental constraints, which include particular zoning text that could constrain development, along with non-governmental constraints, including the market, environmental constraints like slope, infrastructural constraints. And so one of the key things that the legislature requires is that where constraints are identified, that the housing plan includes measures to either reduce the impact of those constraints or do away with them if possible as well. Chapter F is the resources and sites inventory. And this is the chapter that really focuses on that RHNA and the sites to meet the RHNA that we discussed last meeting. It also includes administrative resources that can help facilitate housing development, as well as available financial resources, including grants, nonprofits, and other funding sources. And then the final chapter, as required by state law, is to look back at your progress in implementing the goals and programs that you put in place last time and reviewing those objectives and how well you have performed as a community. So then I'd like to go through some of these notable housing programs. The first is to provide adequate sites to meet the RHNA. And this is a required program by HCD. And it's important to note, though, that the city can accommodate the RHNA under existing current zoning without making any rezonings at this point. The sites inventory uses vacant and underutilized sites and also projects out the potential ADUs or accessory dwelling units that could be developed. We're also able to take credit for quite a significant amount of projects that you've had in the pipeline or that have been constructed in the last year. The next program is called the No Net Loss. And this was a law that was put in place a while ago and then recently modified to tweak it and make it a little trickier. So the cities are required to what's called maintain their sites inventory. So this means if a site that is identified in the housing element to meet the lower income RHNA develops at a density that is less than what we thought it would develop and what we projected in the housing element, or it develops as market rate units, the city must find that adequate other sites exist in town or rezone new land within 180 days. And also, just like the last housing element, all of the identified sites are by right sites so that development can't be denied. So because of this no net loss requirement, and it's unlikely that all of the sites that were identified in the housing element will develop with 100% affordable units, we have included in the housing element somewhat of a surplus to provide that buffer to be able to track that progress, as well as, so that is done through vacant sites, underutilized sites, and projections for ADUs. And in addition, there are other options that the city can explore to guide projects toward more affordable design, such as limiting unit sizes. This program, Program 1C, is about mixed-use development. And the intent here is to really increase project certainty and streamline the development process. This program calls the city to consider identifying appropriate mid-block locations outside of downtown where future mixed use and residential development could occur. This is in commercial zoning districts. And the program calls out that the city must consider appropriate jobs housing balance when so doing. This program kind of goes hand in hand with the identification of certain particular sites. So this program calls the city to develop mixed use standards to really create the design quality and articulate what the city is desiring to get out of mixed use projects. And one of the reasons that this is put in place is that the Housing Accountability Act requires that projects that are 2/3 residential or more must be approved or not reduced with density if they meet all the development standards. So this goes in tandem with another program about creating objective design standards. So these objective design standards and very clearly and well-written mixed-use standards are important to ensure that quality construction occurs and that there is design certainty in projects moving forward. Program 2B is to consider an inclusionary housing ordinance. The city's existing policy requires a percentage of affordable units in planned developments and specific plans, and has done quite a great job in helping the city meet past housing goals. This helps consider moving that a step forward as to really encourage more lower income housing and more kind of a mix of housing throughout, mix of affordable housing throughout a lot of projects rather than concentrating it. This would consider replacing the policy with an ordinance. Because the state is mandating greater by right requirements and through the Housing Accountability Act, this is an opportunity to explore alternatives to meet the affordable housing goals and really achieve some of those goals that are set in place. Program 2G relates to specific plans. And this clarifies that the application, the city practice has been to apply the standard to require a specific plan to single family neighborhoods of more than 100 units. And this program is intended to clarify that and to really ensure the distribution of land uses and infrastructure associated with those new neighborhoods. Program 3A is about the development process streamlining. And this is it's a goal of the legislature, and it's also something that came up with the public to really pursue a process that helps streamline as much as possible. And one of the components of this could be through ADU stock plans, accessory dwelling unit stock plans, to make it easier for residents to construct an ADU on their property. Program 3B calls the city to adopt these objective design standards that will really set the criteria for a high quality design for multifamily and mixed use developments throughout the city. These can be related to architecture, site design, parking and landscaping, and are intended to help facilitate a variety of housing types while creating the certainty that developers want and also the certainty in a high quality design that the city is looking for. Program 3C relates to multifamily housing and the permit process for that. Because the Housing Accountability Act does limit the city's ability to reduce the density of certain projects or disapprove a project, this program calls the city to consider revising the existing CUP requirement for multifamily developments in concert with the objective design standards to continue to ensure neighborhood compatibility and quality design. Program 3D is a very specific tailored program to look at the zoning height in the RMF zone. Currently, the code requires both a height maximum in feet and in stories, which can constrain certain developments, especially on slopes. This program asks the city to just regulate based on feet, which is generally a best practice for zoning in general, and really allows for more flexibility and potentially better looking design as well. And the CUP would remain for developments that would want to exceed that height limit. Program 3E is pertaining to small lot subdivisions. And this is really an effort to not only streamline the process, but also get high quality development with clear expectations for developers. This can be through flexible minimum lot sizes. It really does encourage affordable by design by smaller units, increased homeownership opportunities, but again, does help both the city and developers understand what those standards are that the city is looking to see incorporated into those developments. Program 3G pertains to emergency shelters and really just says that the city will take a look back at the overlay zone that exists to make sure that it continues to comply with state law as state law evolves. And as needed, evaluate the need to expand that zone to other appropriate properties if necessary. Program 3H pertains again to new housing laws and states that the city will analyze existing code to ensure that you are in compliance with state laws. In particular, for transitional and supportive housing, these are uses that must be treated as a regular residential multifamily use and should be articulated in your zoning code as such. Emergency shelters, as indicated, have very clear expectations from the legislature of how they can be treated through one zone. And then there's a new law that pertains to something called low barrier navigation centers. And these are a type of shelter that helps facilitate kind of the low barrier component of it. Means that folks who can have a partner or a dog and storage of their things, this is the type of shelter that would allow those types of uses and makes it easier for folks who have a partner or a family or a dog or belongings to really access the shelter. And so these shelters by state law are required to be allowed in certain zones. And so this program articulates that the city will look at your code to update to make sure that you're consistent with state law. Program 3L is pertaining to water and sewer service providers. Once the housing element is adopted by City Council, the legislation requires that a draft of the housing element is sent to all water and sewer service providers. The program also asks that the city look to work with the water and sewer providers, or water provider, since the city is the sewer provider, to grant priority service delivery for affordable housing and to really just discuss possible options to ease water and sewer fees for affordable housing. So then finally, the third chapter that really focuses on this regional vision, this is a united regional framework to unlock our potential to develop an adequate supply of housing and infrastructure and support economic prosperity. This is an effort to really address issues as a larger community. The vision and goals really focus on regional collaboration and an understanding that working together, you'll be able to address some of the region's significant issues. This is an effort, again, with the county and all 7 cities working collaboratively to move forward with this. All 7 cities and the county have essentially the same chapter included in their housing element, nearly verbatim, with these key goals and vision statement. And there will be an ongoing process that's focused on identifying housing and supportive infrastructure opportunities and a commitment to improving the jobs housing balance throughout the region. Community development directors from all of the cities have been meeting regularly to discuss the regional goals and to create this chapter. They're still working on refining components and the implementation of these goals. But it recognizes that through further regional efforts and ongoing coordination, these goals will be put in place and future implementation is also moving forward. So looking forward, we are here in the orange box with the City Council hearing to review the housing element. Once we have received all the comments tonight, we will revise the housing element and send it up to state HCD and work collaboratively with them to make sure that it complies with state law. The Planning Commission and City Council hearings will happen after that. The HCD has 60 days to review the draft once they receive it, and we'll be working with them throughout that period. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to scroll on back to address any of the particular comments in earlier slides or anything else in the draft housing element.
Thank you, Genevieve.
Phil, did you want us to go ahead and begin asking questions of Genevieve, or did you have a report to combine with that?
Yes, let's go ahead and start with the questions. Maybe we can scroll back to the beginning of some of those particular programs. And also just want to remind you also as well, we at some point will need to take public testimony, public comments tonight on this as well when we're done with council questions.
Absolutely. And I think it's good to remember we've been looking at the issues surrounding the arena regarding the housing element for many months now, and getting a lot of input and continuing to do that. And a lot of the things in here are things that while they're in the plan, they're not implemented right this second. And so I really want the members of the public to understand that when we talk about, say, model ADU standards or certain things like that, certain plans, stock plans that might be available, that is coming. Other changes we might make will come during the general plan update that we'll be doing in the next year to 18 months. And so I just want the public to understand that this is a process of doing that, and also to realize that the regional housing needs allocation that we've been given as a city is 843 units, of which we have met all except for 266. And so it's good to note that we've done quite a good job with housing. We traditionally have done a good job and will continue to do that. And now our job here is really to find those 266 and more. We're not saying that's it, but and more. And the 266 really looks to the low and the very low. So those tend to be the most difficult to get built. So thank you, Genevieve. That was a really, really good report. And let's go ahead and I can look to lights. They're kind of over here, but I can look. But Heather, you can raise your hand. So I've got a hand raised by Councilmember Newsom. So why don't we start with you?
I think this question is going to be more for Phil. Thank you, Genevieve, for the report. It was very thorough. As I'm looking onto Program 3C, multifamily housing permitting, it talks about to reduce constraints to multifamily housing production. The city will review and, if necessary, revise the CUP requirements for multifamily. Is this something, Phil, that when we're looking at creating the general plan changes and design standards, new design standards being adopted, is all of that going to be addressed at once?
Yes, it's all connected, relatively connected, really, in that particular way. What the state's asking us to do, what they've done with a lot of new policies, is they're asking for multifamily housing to essentially be, someone should be able to be allowed to build up to that density and know that they're not going to get denied. So they essentially are asking to make the housing by right, but that doesn't mean we can't have a review process. That doesn't mean we can't have a discretionary action. That doesn't mean we can't have project conditions. That doesn't mean we can't have design review. What that means is they just want to offer surety to applicants, and sometimes a conditional use permit process can be used as a process to approve or deny based on consistency with the general plan. And what they've essentially done with the state law is say that instead of just an approval or denial, you can condition, you can design review, you can have objective standards. But if you're telling them that they can build to 12 units or 14 units, you need to let them build those units if they comply with all of your needs, all of your conditions, all of your design requirements. That's what that's speaking to. So when they say, look at your CUP requirements, the state is basically saying, make a policy or create implementation that makes the review process more streamlined and more surety for the applicant so that they know they can succeed through that and they know what their design standards are going to be.
Is this similar to what we've been talking in the design review about standards of what we're wanting our community to look like?
Yes.
Okay. What time frame are you thinking? This is still a few years out before a design standard?
I wouldn't like to say a few years, but we do have a busy plate ahead of us right now with a general plan update looming, this particular process. We also have affordable housing standards to get through, but it is something that we will need to implement at some point. We'll need to implement this particular policy. Now what we're doing is crafting the policy in the program. We can choose to implement that as time allows. So I'm thinking it could be something that follows the citywide general plan land use update, and then we create design standards from that stem out of that would probably be a logical approach.
Okay, thank you.
Lights aren't working tonight. We'll start with Councilmember Fonzie. Is your mic on?
Got it. I'm sorry. Thank you for the report, Genevieve. Very thorough. A couple of questions, however, that I was hoping you or Phil could clarify. And when we get to the housing needs assessment portion of the element about page 134, we have a lot of figures about vacancy and occupancy and income and social status and so forth, but nothing to indicate future projected demand for either for sale types of homes or for rent types of affordable housing. And I was wondering if that's something that could be put into the element so that we'd have a better handle on what we are really looking for and what our community needs before it's built.
Yeah, so the housing needs assessment is kind of narrowly focused to articulate what the state requires. And there's not a lot of good projections out there about ownership and rent basis, but we can do some research and see what we can find.
Okay, because I think that would be helpful for us as a council to know where
Sure.
we need to go so that we can get there and do it correctly to meet the needs. One of the things that we had happen this year as council members and as a city is we had a affordability by design project that was approved on El Camino Real, and I'm sure you're aware of that one. I've seen these kind of housing infills, smaller lots, smaller homes, more affordable, both for rental and for sale, to help the new owners to get their foot in the door. I've heard it called middle housing. And middle housing isn't really mentioned in the element, and maybe this isn't something that the state does, but it's something that really resonated with, I think, the whole council, because it meets a particular need that we don't have this in our community, and throughout the county, we really don't either. And there's many people, even in rental situations, that would like to have a duplex or a fourplex and have a small yard for their pet or their child, but we really are talking about multi-story apartment buildings with maybe a playground, which makes it really tough to have a dog and other things. So I'm wondering if we could somehow put this into our element that we're looking for middle housing, and maybe it would be in the small lot subdivision area, which could possibly work and be in different zoning areas, not just multifamily, depending on what it is. So Phil, I know this is challenging. It's kind of late in the game perhaps to get it into this one. I actually think it's a very valuable tool and it fits the Atascadero model better than high-rise apartment buildings.
It's been a terminology that's been talked about a lot lately in the planning world. They call it the missing middle. And there's a lot of information out there on that. So let's take a look and see what we can fit in there, and we'll check that out.
Okay, and I was hoping perhaps we could get at least a blurb or a bullet on page 103 that it has the various goals, and one of them could be encourage the creation of middle housing or whatever you want to call it, to include duplexes, twin homes, such as they have at Sierra Bonita and Paso Robles for seniors, modular homes, etc., for rent and for sale. And then also something about encouraging affordable by design homes at affordable for sale programs.
Okay. Got it.
Okay. You think it's possible?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. You showed a
Anything's possible as
discussion.
long as you,
Go ahead, Phil, I'm sorry.
I'll say anything is possible as long as the state can agree with it and as long as the rest of the council agrees with it as well. So.
Got it. Okay, well, this is just mine, but I'm going to throw it out there and the rest of them can hash it out and throw it to the side if they wish. And Genevieve, you had a discussion board when you had public comments and you showed it, I think it was on page 101 in our report. And one of them was, it mentioned more housing behind El Camino and existing commercial or residential, that we have some large lots on both the north and south ends of towns that have existing homes sometimes, or they're commercial and a lot of vacant space behind them. And I'm wondering if this is something that we could put into a new mixed use or some other, I'm not sure how we address it. I think it's certainly a potential to do some redevelopment behind what we already have. And so if we can put it in as potential development areas or whatever, you're the pro, but I'm thinking this is an area that we actually could use for some of the duplexes or triplexes or whatever that we can get back there. Let's see.
I do want to make sure we stick with questions because right now we're kind of doing a little bit of direction. So I would just want to be careful that we stick with questions and then do the direction after public comment.
Okay, I'll try.
It's hard.
Okay, I know that it's really important to state that we don't have any impediments. In our report, it says on page 154, the second paragraph, that Atascadero has not adopted any local amendments or model codes that increase housing costs. But Phil, I know that we've talked about parking issues for multifamily covered parking, and it's also proposed for ADU. Is that something we have to have in there, or can we honestly say that we are not putting up impediments when we're requiring covered garages and covered areas for parking, especially with ADUs?
Yes, I think that's the case. I think the distinction between covered or uncovered, I don't think that's an issue. I think that's what you're asking there. I don't know. I'll have to look at that and see how we can.
Yeah, I want us to be really honest here, and if it's an impediment, we've got to say it is, although I'd prefer that we get our housing element certified. But, I think it should come in some place that we're going to change this or look at it, or is that possible?
Yeah, it is true. I think that in a lot of cases, covered parking has been an impediment. It's been challenging to fit in and can take a lot of space and additional costs, and so I think that's certainly possible.
Yeah, especially the ADUs, which are going to be
ADUs. The state definitely has a lot of limitations on what we can and can't do, and has limitations on the parking and requiring replacement parking. That's where it gets a little bit sticky, and we're constantly looking for ways to make that work. But certainly, I think there's some additional room to look at that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Councilmember Funk?
Yes, thank you. First, I want to thank you for this very thorough presentation and document. And calling attention to the page that I first want to talk about is right up there on the screen, is that is where we have all this public input. And I was noticing as we went through that I saw the thumbprints of that input throughout the document, and the request for ADUs and expanding the options of that, and reutilizing underutilized shopping centers, and dealing with density bonuses and so forth, that are directly in response to what we've received from public input. Is there anything additional that's in there that you would like to particularly point out where public input shaped the process?
Let's see. I mean, I think that this was a great start to kick off this project, because we got such good feedback, and it was a really collaborative group that was so solution oriented. I was kind of floored. It was just a great experience for me, and to be able to kind of just seep into that that mentality of really being solution oriented, and that was kind of what we wanted to reflect through the housing element, and to try and really come up with some very clear programs that will help make development more certain for folks as they go through the development process. And so many of the programs, you note, are, you know, tweaks to the zoning code to try and create that certainty within what we often hear is predictable flexibility, is what folks who are developers are looking for, so that they can have some options to create, you know, creative projects, but also have some certainty when they're coming forward that their project will be approved. So those kind of key items, I think, were really good takeaways that we hope are reflected in the housing element.
As I look at this, it seems like there are two different aspects of this work. One of them is about where can we have this housing? And that's a process that hasn't changed very much at all, because that strategically we can meet the requirements of the state without adding new properties to that list. But how do we make it easier for that housing to actually happen is where you see all of the activity that's on this page, and a lot of the things that you described in the programs for that. Is it fair to make that distinction?
I think that's true. I think that you know, we do have a surplus of units that we were able to identify a path forward to meeting the RHNA within your existing zoning policy, but it's not a huge surplus. So I think that through the general plan update, that can kind of focus in a little bit more on those locations for housing. And then again, I think you're right. The second component is really, how do we make it easier for that housing to get built? And so that is really the focus of the element.
Okay, thank you. Now I have a number of questions that are more technical in nature, or specific going through the document. Starting on page, and these are just going to be in the order that these things appear in the document, so I can follow my little sticky notes. On page 83, in the second paragraph of program 3.c, where we're looking at multifamily housing permitting, in the objective design standards the program is calling for that to be developed. Could those standards include a process standard such as, you know, you can do this by right, but you do have to notify the neighbors?
Yes. Yep. So as long as you are complying with those objective design standards, the law states that you cannot disapprove it or reduce the density, but you're certainly allowed to have that public process and you know, focus that design as needed to fit the community.
Great. And can we also, in the course of those standards, could we address trees, the preservation, the planting, the inclusion of it? Because that's something that people really value about our community.
Absolutely. That's something that can be considered in that, as long as you're not reducing the density or precluding a project.
Okay, I'm going to skip that question. Pardon me a second here. Okay. Page 108. As we're looking in the programs for inclusionary housing, for the general public's benefit, and I mean, we're doing this in a context where we just heard a lot of people who deeply felt concerns and based on strong experience and concern about the effects of racism and the history of racism on the shape of our community. And so we often think of inclusionary in the sense of race. But the inclusionary here is about where is deed restricted affordable housing being constructed within the community. Am I right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. But to the extent to which minority communities have been disadvantaged economically by that history of racism, it matters that we are able to have inclusionary, to have housing around the community. And this is a way, this would be a discussion around an inclusionary housing ordinance would be a place in which those issues could be addressed. Is that true?
Correct.
On a less lofty note, same page, program 2C, the Affordable Housing in Lieu funds. Does that include the People's Self-Help Housing Project that we reviewed at this body very recently, or is that already part of our numbers in the bag and this is about new projects?
This is
I
intended.
think,
Sorry, go ahead, Phil.
oh, go ahead. I guess, yeah, this is intended going forward. The People's Self-Help Housing Project, it's not built yet, so it's not in the bag in terms of counting the units. It is in the bag, so to speak, in terms of entitled projects, and it was recognized in our previous housing element. But this is really going forward at this point in this particular draft program.
Okay.
Councilmember Funk, are you referring to the 400,000 we approved at our last meeting from the
Yes.
in lieu fees? Yes, that's
Yes.
this fund.
Okay, that's the same fund, but the new projects where the goal is to assist with the development of 5 affordable units, that would be a goal for something additional.
Yes, and it's
Sorry.
ongoing. We have the fund and we will continue, you know, until which time we have a discussion about our inclusionary housing policy and how we want to move forward. But yes, we're continuing that.
Yes, okay. Because I was noting in 2C, we're looking at the goal is to assist with the development of 5 affordable units. And then in 2D, we're looking at 5 affordable housing project applications. Are we talking about 5 homes or 5 projects? If we're trying to get to 266 housing units that would support low or very low income individuals.
So there are 2 different measurement factors there. You're correct. So with 2D, because this is affordable housing application, so this could be, you know, affordable housing developer looking for a letter of support from the city, those kinds of applications, and we don't know the size of how big those developments could be, so that's why we used projects there. And then for the in lieu funds, we wanted to make sure that the goal was attainable, but because of the way that the timeline works for meeting the RHNA, it actually like rolls back a little bit. So you may be able to count current projects that are in the entitlement pipeline towards your objectives to meet those needs. But we left the number a bit low to reflect what the previous goals were so that we can make sure that we could attain them. But we can take a look at what the People's Self-Help Project would include, because the 400,000 wouldn't necessarily cover the whole project. We wanted to make sure we were, you know, showing an attainable goal.
Sure, okay. Because, yeah, I guess if you think about 50 to 80,000 a unit, maybe, the 400,000 only gets us so far in the course of the larger projects. Okay, thank you. On, let me skip that one. Okay, let's go looking at some of the statistics that Councilmember Fonzie was talking about earlier. And I want to continue on with that. On page 124, where we're looking at our table DJ, are these census numbers that indicate that Black or African American individuals constituted only 2% of our city's population in the 2010 census? Yeah, okay, so yeah, so that would be a pretty solid number because that's census. What we see in the 2018 numbers is that already small population has dropped by more than half. Are we confident in those 2018 numbers?
So the 2018 numbers are not 100% count like the 2010 and the 2020 will be. These are an estimate. We use the 5-year average to try and get a little bit closer and a smaller margin of error, but there is still a kind of significant margin of error with the American Community Survey. And so that number could be reflected of, you know, it could be in the wash. The change of a percent might not be accurate because of that margin of error that exists because it's an estimate. And we won't know until the 2020 census actually does a solid count.
Sure. But, you know, it is an important reason for people to fill out those 2020 census forms if they haven't already. And also for us to look at this when, you know, to ask staff to come back to us when we get those 2020 census numbers, because this tells us something important about what we're creating in our community and the extent to which people actually, you know, people feel welcome and are in fact coming to live here. And it's not a strength of our community to have such a small Black population. Okay. Yeah, moving on to on page 131 in table D13, where we're talking about the composition of various households that are being served. And I know this is kind of boilerplate language, but is it you know, there's reference to female household or no husband present with children, or male household or no wife present with children. Is it possible, you know, and married couples, is it possible for us to adjust these, the data in this table to, and the labels to both better reflect that there are households which are 2-parent households of the same sex, and there are households where that are 2-parent households in committed relationships, same sex or opposite sex that may not be married?
Yeah, so these are labels that are provided by the census. So the household composition that is available, it's articulated by these, you know, somewhat out of date terminologies. We can see if there is a breakdown that would include it, but just for to be more with the times and to reflect existing folks in the community, we can change it to spouse in the table for sure.
Yeah, that would be helpful. It also is, you know, as we are looking at this, the economic issue is about whether or not you have a stable relationship that is, you know, whether you got 2 incomes or 1 income or 2 people in the process of caring for a child, as opposed to whether they're married or whether they're the same sex.
Yes, I think the only clarification that I would make is that in housing element law, they do call out female-headed households because there is just a history of female-headed households being at a significant economic disadvantage amongst all households.
Right, and that's an appropriate distinction to make. So, okay, and then on page 135, in table D16, another thing we learn about our community and that you're presenting here is the extent to which our housing units were built recently or much earlier. And we can see that a significant percentage of the housing units here in Atascadero were built before the city was incorporated in 1979. And that we have about 6% that were built before 1950. Do we have, and we also know that at the beginning of Atascadero, a great many of the housing deeds were restricted so that people of color could not own these properties. Do we have any idea where along the line, was there a specific date at which that restriction became unenforceable, or did that did that lose its effect over a broader period of time? And that might be, you may not be the person that needs to answer that, but I'll put that question out there.
It's a very interesting question. I mean, I don't have a ready answer to it. I would guess that it would have happened with the Fair Housing Act, but I don't have that answer offhand. Phil, do you happen to know?
I don't.
I do have an answer. I did ask the city attorney to research that. Officially in 1948, those became illegal with a Supreme Court decision. Obviously, other acts that came later reinforced that, and further case decisions certainly reinforced that.
Okay, so it's also something people point out to me with their housing deeds that, it's part of the title history, so you actually can't get rid of it. I tried to do that once on a house. You can't. It's embedded in the history, but it teaches us something important. Okay. You had addressed some of my concerns separately. For the record, on page 184, there's a description of the services provided. We're looking at what's being done for the homeless, and we heard concerns about that again tonight. Description of transitional food and shelter, and that looks a bit out of date to me. Is that being updated?
Yes, I just looked up on their website and have some new language to reflect their current service delivery.
Yes, because they do have an active dual mission, really, or well, a three-part mission in addressing mentally fragile persons around the county, from all over the county, as well as doing the warming center, which is, we heard about low barrier navigation centers. This is more in that mode earlier, and then other services for the homeless. And both they and ECHO are mentioned here in this document. Okay. And I think I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Couple of questions. And the basic premise of this, though, is we have to, as part of our housing element, comply with our allocation under the Regional Housing Needs Assessment arena. So we have to show where these units could be built by affordability category. So you mentioned, Genevieve, you talked about density of, there's a level at which a density is automatically considered affordable. And I think in the report it says that's 20, if I'm correct. And then we also say, we talk about affordable by design, which I take could be a size, although I don't know that there's a specific, is there a specific size that is considered affordable?
necessarily. So it's assumed just through housing element law that if it's more than 20, that it's easier for affordable housing to develop because they can use economies of scale for their construction. For affordable by design, this is any type of process that just makes construction less expensive. So some of that is smaller development types. It may be the type of housing that it is. If it's manufactured housing, that might be more affordable by design. So any factors that effectively reduce the cost of housing to the end user.
So when we recently approved, we call it a tiny home project, they were in 600 square feet, the neighborhood of that, 20 some homes, I think. Is that considered affordable by design? Or does that all depend on how it works out?
I think it absolutely can be and often is. But I'm sure there's an outlier to the rule where a tiny home that's 600,000 or 600 square feet could be a luxury space that becomes really expensive. So it all is the end result.
That kind of gets to my basic question here is, so we have to submit this element which says, hey, we got these places where we can build either high density housing or smaller houses. And they're presumed to be affordable. And this is part of a 10-year plan, but with our housing market, at least what it has been in the last few years, 5 years from now, somebody builds one of those, it could be a 600 square foot house and still be $500,000, which would not, as I understand it, meet the affordability criteria. But we counted the house as part of our affordable things in this process, correct?
Yeah, so we're trying to set the framework for through the housing element, you try and set the framework. And then through the 8-year process, the city will track development. And it may not happen on the sites that we identified. It might happen somewhere else. It might happen that an affordable housing developer comes in and has a great project and you meet a portion of your RHNA on a site we didn't even identify. It could be that some of the units come in and you can expect them to be more affordable. Some local rentals can meet the criteria for affordability just based on what they're renting. Often that's more older projects, but that could exist on a newer project. So through the upcoming 8 years, the city will be tracking and reporting to HCD all of the building permits that are issued in the community to gauge against these objectives that we're setting in the housing element. And while the housing element sets that stage, it won't be a 1-for-1 on each site. As it evolves, the city will just continue to track it.
What I'm trying to understand is, so let's say somebody comes along 5 years from now and they build a 50-unit high density set of apartments, which one, based on the circumstances today, would presume are going to be affordable, but at the time they say we're going to rent them for, I don't know, $2,000 a month, or let's say they say they're going to rent them at $1,500, which at the time is affordable, but a few years later they're now renting at $2,000, which is not affordable. Do we gain credit and then lose credit in these scenarios? Or are we safe that, we lay out this plan and the plan is good, and then we just see 8 years from now how well we did?
It's a little bit of both. So it is a point in time when the building permit's finalized for the tracking of the project or the progress. So in your example of if someone comes in and builds a 50-unit development, and if there's a couple of different choose your own adventure pathways. The first, if they build it at market rate and it's actually like kind of a luxury development, then, and it is on a housing site that we identified in the plan, then the city will need to make sure that there's other adequate sites in the plan to accommodate that, because it didn't develop as the lower income housing that we were anticipating. If you have an inclusionary housing policy in place, and a few of those units fall within that category, then you'll be able to count that portion that is counted for the inclusionary towards that goal, but not the others.
So along those lines, we include in our element here ADUs on, so second houses or accessory units on single family lots. We count that as part of our inventory of places where affordable housing can be built. I'm not sure what everybody's thinking there. I mean, having built an ADU on our property, they're not affordable in that sense. I mean, if you weren't building it for family reasons, you probably wouldn't consider them affordable. My question is, and so not very many of them are getting built in our community, even though they're available. Many lots could have them. So if that doesn't happen, if we expect 20 ADUs to be built a year and it turns out only 5 are built a year, what does that do to our compliance with this requirement?
That, under current legislation, does not pose any issues for the city. The city's role is to really make sure that the parameters are all put in place to make it as easy as possible. That the state legislation for ADUs is quite generous. The state is actually assuming quite a significant increase over the next 8 years, 10 years, as legislation continues to evolve around ADUs. And the state is allowing us to project out even larger than your historic development patterns exist. We were pretty conservative for Atascadero, understanding that there's slope concerns and sewer constraints that would preclude certain lots. So we were a bit more conservative than some of the allowances that HCD would have provided. But current legislation, there's nothing in current legislation that would penalize the city for not actually meeting those RHNA targets. That's not to say that it won't change. There's been a slew of housing legislation, as you know, and that looks to continue into the future.
Thank you. Last question. I was struck on page 138 under housing problems, the definition of overcrowding. It appears rather simply defined as more than one person per room. And growing up in a room with 3 brothers, in a reasonably sized house, in a fairly nice neighborhood, I had no idea I was overcrowded. My question regarding this, other than it seems like a silly definition to me, is does this have any bearing? I didn't see where this really had any bearing on our housing inventory or how we set things out. So how does this affect the housing element?
So one clarification is that it is more than one person per room. So that includes all rooms in the household except for the kitchen and the bathroom. So that includes the living room and any office, dining room. All those are considered rooms. So that's how it's not per bedroom. And then if the overcrowding rates are higher than average for the region, we might want to look at something like a focus on larger unit sizes or some other kind of program to encourage the types of housing that are identified as high need. That didn't elevate as kind of a high need in Atascadero.
I guess my concern is that when you have high housing prices, people start to move in together, multiple families, things like that, which would seem like a more logical definition of overcrowding. And people also start to do illegal things like illegal garage conversions and stuff like that. But I couldn't see how this impacted the development of our plan itself.
It doesn't directly necessarily. It's really identifying just one of the concerns that folks living in the community might have. So if they are severely overcrowded in the case of multiple families doubling up, and just the impacts that that has on not only quality of life but also on maintaining the units, that's kind of why it's included. But it's really looking at housing problems that folks have, and so that's identified as overcrowding, overpayment, so paying more than 30% of your income on housing, and any other housing problems. The census identifies other housing problems to be like not having plumbing facilities and those kinds of things that you might see in those garage conversions.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all I have.
Genevieve, we talk about SB2, and so council, I want to say back in 2013, 2014, we looked at that requirement to do that, and we dedicated a site for that SB2 emergency overlay, and that is where our current El Camino, homeless shelter is currently located. And what we're seeing in here, I'm seeing a couple of things. I'm seeing that we're needing to look at, do we need to expand that based upon, current state legislation? And then we start looking at the low barrier navigation centers with AB 101 and certain by right things. And I'm trying to get a handle on what that might look like. How do we know if we need to expand our emergency overlay zone? At what point? I think any community would want to make sure that you have centers like this in a place that is safe for everyone. And how can that be ensured? And also, how do we know if we're required to expand that overlay? So a little two-part question, but they're related.
Sure. So there's no significant changes to SB2 at this point. The nuance is that each time you do your housing element, the legislation requires that you look at what the existing homeless need is. So what is the sheltered and the unsheltered current need in the community? So we looked at the point in time homeless count and looked at the capacity of the existing overlay. So at the Echo site, which has been expanded, which is great, there is additional capacity on that parcel just because it's larger. So we kind of found that there would be enough capacity in that overlay given current conditions and current homeless counts. As that homeless count evolves, the city might want to kind of re-look at that. And this will also be something that potentially HCD looks at to make sure that when they make sure that you're complying with state law, that your existing homeless count can be accommodated with that overlay. So that's kind of the intent of around that emergency shelter program, is to take a look at that as the point in time counts continue to evolve. And then your question about the low barrier navigation centers, that is brand new legislation, which is certainly evolving and just came into effect, I believe, last year, or maybe it was January 1st of this year, to require that cities allow these kinds of shelters by right in mixed-use zones or non-residential zones that allow residential uses.
So it seems like there's a duplication then somewhat. And while we're certainly not right now not at risk of having too much, I do know that, I think most of us see that in Atascadero, we provide quite a bit of shelter and, really for the North County and also for the rest of the county. So we want to make sure that there is a balance, and granted, we're talking about Atascadero's housing element, but we want to make sure that we start to share that responsibility throughout our region, and particularly here in the North County. So just, I guess there's not a good answer to my question because right now this could look like, I know the numbers in here, I saw it, it's 120, 130, something that was in our count. So we have half of that at Echo. So what you're saying with current state law is we could be required to say, increase Echo's capacity, whether they want to or have the ability to do that or not, to the current count. Or we would need to expand our zone elsewhere.
Mostly I think that's mostly what I was trying to say. I think that because the parcel is kind of big enough to accommodate an expansion. We were kind of finding that the overlay itself seems to, from our perspective, to comply with that requirement of state law.
Got it. Okay.
And the good thing is Genevieve is also the consultant for Paso Robles, so there'll be some good discussion there as well on that particular topic.
I do know that, so that's why I made sure to bring that up. And I know they are working on something right now, and we're very pleased about that. Let's see. On that table on 131, page 131, we're talking wife, husband, spouse. I was just wondering if the term partner could be used. That seems to be, I think, a little more, I think kind of captures the essence and doesn't pigeonhole any particular definition. That's
okay.
That's possible.
Make that change.
On page 154, and this is, I think this would be a Phil question. This is specifically related to building codes and enforcement. So I know Councilmember Fonzie was talking about parking standards, which would be a separate comment. But building codes and enforcement, we say the second paragraph, aside from this ordinance, which we're talking about the ordinance for the installation of fire sprinklers, the city has not adopted amendments to the model codes that increase housing costs. But Phil, I believe that ended up becoming part of the model code, did it not?
Yes, I seem to recall that is accurate. We did have that, so we may need to amend that particular paragraph. I think that's accurate. That with our last building code update, we did some of that. So we need to look at that paragraph and see if that's accurate. I don't believe that's.
Because then if that's the case, we may not even need to have that part in there about the fire, because basically we haven't done anything different, or we keep that in and we say this is part of the model code and we haven't adopted anything that increases housing costs over and above the model code. Okay.
Yeah, we'll look at that.
And I think it's good to point out, and Genevieve, I just wanted to say I'm glad that it's in page 88. We say the consultant's analysis found that the city does not impose greater site improvement or building code regulations on housing projects than is otherwise required by the state or the surrounding communities. And in addition, permit processing times are in line or with or more expeditious than surrounding jurisdictions and comply with state streamlining requirements. So thank you for including that. I think that was really good to point out. And I realized that wasn't a question, so I kind of broke my own rule, but I thought it was good to get that out. All right, with that, why don't we go ahead and, does anybody need to take a quick break before we go to public comment? How's everyone doing? All right, I think we're doing all right. So let's go ahead and open this up to public comment. We have nobody here present in the chambers, but I will ask Luke if we've got anyone on the phone. And by the way, if you are listening, reminder of that phone number is 805-538-2888. That's 805-538-2888. And Luke, do we have any callers? We have no callers. I also say, manager, if we have anyone who has written in. No comments.
We did not receive any emails on this item.
Okay. I think that's a sign that we've done a lot of really good outreach, and so many of you have given input, which the screen that we're showing right here shows the very beginning and kickoff of that, and we've received a lot of input from the community, and we're incredibly grateful for that because we all do this together. All right, so we will go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to council for a discussion. And so what you need from us, Phil, is we need to provide any, make sure we kind of agree and get these comments down that we want to be changed, but then basically we need to do a motion and authorize you to submit the draft plan once any little changes that we have are made. Is that correct?
Yes, that is accurate. Correct.
Okay.
And again, a reminder, this is not our last chance to look at this. This is an ongoing process. This is
Correct.
kind of still the starting point of this process, or the middle of this process. So yeah, we're looking for your feedback on those programs, and any refinements necessary before submitting to HCD.
Okay, wonderful.
And Mayor?
Yes.
I apologize.
No
I
worries.
would just recommend too that we don't try and wordsmith those, but leave some of that to Bill and the consultant to be able to craft to make sure that we're catching the essence of what you guys are looking for.
Good thing to point out. Thank you. Because sometimes this council can get into wordsmithing. Okay. So some of the notes that I had written down that Councilmember Fonzie was talking about maybe future needs. Genevieve, and you had said that we could do some research and see if there's something about future needs that can be put into there if that actually has an impact. We don't want to throw something in there that doesn't, but if it's, you know, the kind of information that Councilmember Fonzie was talking about that would be valuable for us in making decision for future needs. So kind of leave that for you to find and decide if that's a fit. That everybody good with that? Okay. And then the discussion of middle housing, to be able to add that. I think I think we would all agree on that. Yes, I'm seeing nods. And you feel clear on that, Genevieve?
Yep, I do. Yeah, we will absolutely add a little bit of discussion, and we can add a policy about encouraging that.
Wonderful.
Can I just clarify? Did you want a policy under, okay, let me go to page 1 of.
I'm going to stop sharing so I can look it up too.
Yeah. We have goal HOS 1, which is provide adequate sites for housing development to accommodate a range of housing by type, size, location, price, and tenure. You had also mentioned some specific language that you were looking for. So under that goal, there's policies that implement, like policy 1.1 is implement land use policies and standards that allow for a range of residential densities and products that will provide households of all types and income levels the opportunity to find suitable ownership or rental housing. And then we'll have a whole bunch of programs in support of that goal and policy. Were you looking more for a program on that, or were you looking for a policy?
It doesn't have to be in that area of goals and policies, although I think it's helpful if we put it in to say that we want to encourage the creation of middle housing to include duplexes, twin homes, modular homes, etc.
Okay.
So we specifically stick it in there so that it's something we know we want.
Okay, and that's something that we want to report on to the state every year on how we're doing on that.
But is that under the policy, or that's what backs up the policy? Because
it's a goal.
So so that rises to the level of one of the 5 goals?
Well, I'm not the author. I'm going to give it to Genevieve, but I'd like to get some verbiage into our report that this is something that would fit into Atascadero's model, and we'd like it to be included, because it's not.
I think that policy is the right avenue. We report on each program, and I think a lot of the programs will help support some of this creation, including the ADUs and some of the small lot subdivision programs. So those programs kind of already support this policy, but that policy is missing. So we can add it. I think under HOS 2, I think kind of diverse housing opportunities to meet all economic segments of the community. I think we can add a 5th program there.
Okay.
Sorry, a 5th policy.
Well, I understand the city manager's earlier question, though, to be that if we add verbiage in our thing as a goal or as part of a goal, that we then have to report on it every year as part of our update to HCD?
We do have to report on progress on the programs, but not necessarily on the policies. Is that what I hear?
Well, correct. That's my question is, are we creating more work for you guys if we include verbiage in here that says, oh, we want to do X, we want to do Y, we want to do Z, and now you guys that is Mr. Dunsmore in particular, have to write 3 more pages of stuff to explain how well we are or are not doing.
That would only happen if we made it a program. but including it as a policy, we won't have to have that additional effort, but the intent is still there.
Thank you.
Okay, sounds like we have some clarity on that. Are we good? Okay. And then, Phil, I think the discussion that we had with that Councilmember Fonzie brought up about parking spots, you were going to look at if we needed to change anything in there. Roberta, did you want to say anything specific to that?
Phil is familiar with this. We've reviewed a few different apartments that are requiring covered parking and specifically garages for multifamily, which is increasing the cost of those units. And the thought is that they could have a parking space without the garage, and it would make it a cheaper unit and more affordable. And so our policy is that we have garages, and it would even including garages for ADUs, which would be some kind of modular, and they don't come with a garage. So my thought is we want to take that and consider that down the road, and it may be an ordinance or change. You know, Phil would be in charge of that, but I don't want this impediment to make our housing less affordable.
Does that belong somewhere? Do we need to make a change in this housing element, or is that something outside of this?
Well, when we make a
that we look
statement
at?
like you were talking about, that we haven't put up any impediments to making them affordable.
That's for the build, but that's for the building code.
And I
That's
want to be
separate.
honest about it and forthright and say, we're not going to do that. And I'm not sure how to say this and put it in an element. This is something finely crafted that goes to the state, but yet I want to be honest about what we're doing, and we don't want to be doing that.
Well, the difference is that's not building code. So that
No,
will
this
be
is
specifically
policy we have in
Yeah.
the city.
So this is specifically that the other statement is specifically that we have not put anything into place that adds upon the model building code. And so I believe that is correct. We're not stating anything out of line or out of integrity there.
Okay.
The separate
Okay.
issue
Well, if that's
is,
the case, then I'm happy with it as it
Okay.
is, and I want the state to be happy with it too.
okay,
But I do want it not to be swept under the rug.
okay. So we know this is something to look at certainly in the near future with new projects coming up, but nothing that needs to change right here. At page 131, we're looking at changing that to partner. And what other comments, recommendations do any council members have? Again, kind of keeping things broad.
They did have two more that I heard.
Yes.
Page 184, we wanted to update the TFS homeless definition and fix that
I
paragraph.
already felt it was already done, so yes, you're right.
And if I might note, they I believe they are in the process of updating that information. This is fairly current, but not the most recent, because I have news, so I'll share.
And I think they can find that
Yeah,
and make sure
so
they have the most up-to-date
Yeah,
correct
if you give us
information
enough,
for TFS. Yes.
I'm hoping you're giving us enough latitude to make this work.
Yes.
And then Mayor, I had that you were interested in if the fire code, the fire sprinkler code is now a state mandate, that we fix that paragraph there on page 154 E12.
Correct. Thanks. I forgot my own recommendation. All right. Any other Councilmember Funk?
Yeah, discussion item here. I have concerns about relying on the theoretical capacity of the ECHO site to handle homeless, in part because there are different constituencies of homeless. And the folks that we're hearing about, ECHO is a transitional shelter, and it serves people who want to, in order to stay there, that they need to maintain a commitment to working a plan of some sort to get out of homelessness and to maintain sobriety. And that's not necessarily a commitment that everyone out there who is unsheltered homeless is willing to make. And there's a variety of supports that, and also that ECHO doesn't allow pets, and that's another constraint. So we really, if we're not happy with the groups of people that we heard about from Jeff and Ryan in our comments today, who are gathering at City Hall steps or gathering in the Salinas riverbed or in the creek, or who, we're trying not to have come down from Paso to do the same. or that the water company is objecting to, we may need to look at sites other than that one, because it would be difficult to accommodate two different models of addressing different constituencies within the homeless group. So if we're looking for how do we address the needs of people who are not suitable for a congregate housing community that ECHO is, and they've got one big building. You're going to be together. And we have people who will work better if they can stay with their pets, who will work better if they can support it independently. And that the path out of homelessness looks different for different groups. So I'm concerned that we not lock ourselves into that particular site as being the only place. I think that we are going to need to look at that overlay, to consider that, and also to look creatively at the policy that's on in program 3.H, looking at accommodating those navigation center type places. It is in the area of supported housing in particular, that sort of, what's the next step if you get somebody who out of their tent in the creek into a place into something that they can call their own, that's small, that asks very little of them, but enables them to get their life together to a point where maybe they can come back into the more traditionally housed community. And we need to think about how to accommodate our share of those folks that are here, because if we don't like where they are, we have to think about where else we want them to go.
I think that is a bigger discussion than what's for the housing element right now. I think what's before us, we've done the research and we are going above and beyond with meeting the needs. So to somehow tonight say, okay, we're going to expand this and now have additional sites, that is going to require a significant amount of public input. It is a big nut to crack. It's not something we just decide today we're going to do. And then you start to mention the resources that would be needed for that. So I appreciate the input. I don't think it's something we can solve tonight with the housing element.
Yeah, what I want to make sure is that the decisions that we make to rely on the theoretical capacity there at ECHO do not either dilute us or preclude us from having this discussion about how we accommodate other elements of the homeless community so that they are not problematically engaging with the community where they are.
Understood. Councilmember Hansi.
Just a very small change to some verbiage, and this would be on page 178, and it would be HDR 5. It's talking about a vacant portion of the knolls of the Avenida Maria project. It says phase 2 is approved for 26 affordable farm worker housing units. That Phil, when we first approved that was for affordable units. It became farm worker units. I think we want to have some flexibility for phase 2 to be either just plain affordable units or farm worker units. So if we fence it in with farm worker, we're stuck with it. But if we take it out and just say affordable housing units, it'll give us more flexibility.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
what page was that on again?
It is page 178, and the item is HDR 5.
Got it.
Yeah, very good catch. Councilmember Newsom, any changes beyond what we've talked about?
I think you guys have been very thorough and covered a lot of them.
Okay.
Done. Thank you.
And I didn't hear any on your end. All right. I think we are good. So with that, I will entertain a motion.
I
I
would.
We
Sure.
adopt staff's recommendations and with these changes.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Newsom and a second by Councilmember Fonzie. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Newsom,
Yes.
Councilmember Fonzie,
Yes.
Councilmember Funk,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Borbeau,
Yes.
Mayor Moreno.
Yes, ma'am.
5-0, motion passes.
Thank you. All right. Now we are on to our discussion item, and this is the standard discussion we've been having the last couple of months with regards to our any COVID-19 update. And, things, are, as our public community forum input said, can be very confusing right now. And it is because there are a lot of restrictions and guidelines depending on industry, and even if your industry is a business owner in there, it might not quite fit the mold. And so what I want to encourage folks to do is that if you are looking, if you go to the page for reopening and you're a business owner and you're looking at what do I need to do or when can I reopen, and it's not clear, or it seems like, well, this is telling me I can't, but I think I should be able to because of this, the particular way I run my business, or it doesn't quite get the nuance of how I operate, then I urge you to call the county. And the number is there at the county website, the readyslow.org. Is it readyslow.org, readyslow.com? Readyslow.org. That's what I thought. Make sure you visit that site, get the phone number, and call the county. I have found when I am trying to get answers for our local businesses that we call that number and we get answers for them right away that are specific to their business. And they really try to be as helpful as possible. They try to be as flexible as possible, keeping the safety of everyone in our community in mind. So if anything is unclear, particularly if you're a business owner, reach out and get those questions answered. We here at the city are happy to help facilitate that. You can also go directly to the county. And with that, I will turn it over to our city manager for any specific updates.
I just wanted to talk briefly about the state order on the use of face coverings. As you see, even though we are all socially distanced here with the new state order, we are required to wear face coverings. If you go to the California Department of Public Health or the state COVID-19 website, it does say guidance for the use of face covering, but it is a governor order. When do you need to wear face coverings? I would highly recommend everybody go to readyslow.org. They have not only the state requirements for face coverings, they have a lot of frequently asked questions and answers there. I'm just going to highlight a few places. We have to wear face coverings inside of or in line to enter any indoor public space. Obviously, the city council chambers is a public space, but so are restaurants, shops, a very long list, gyms, places that people go to, the public is allowed access to, are considered a public space. So you will be required to wear them, or you are required to wear them in there. You're also supposed to wear them when you're engaged in work, whether that be off-site or in the building. You do need to wear them interacting in person with any member of the public, working in any space visited by members of the public, and working in spaces where food is prepared. You also need to wear them outdoors when you cannot maintain that 6-foot distance. So that's a little bit different. There are some exceptions. The city will not be going out and hauling people off to jail for not wearing their masks. We will be talking to, as we receive complaints, we will be talking to businesses and trying to educate them on the governor's orders in order to get compliance. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Fonzie.
Just a quick question regarding those that have health concerns and are not able to wear masks. It's my understanding that the owners of businesses can't call them out because it's a HIPAA requirement. They can't ask, well, why can't you if you have emphysema? Is that correct? That we should give that information to the business owner?
I believe so. I am not an expert on this. This is one where if it is an issue for a business is allowed to deny service to somebody that does not have a mask. That was one of the frequently asked questions. So they can say, it doesn't matter if you have a health condition or whatever, we can deny service to you for not wearing a mask. If a business owner wants to figure out where that nuance is, I would highly recommend that they call the hotline, because there are a lot of nuances in all of this, and I think we're all trying to figure it out.
This is not an easy one, though.
No, it certainly is not.
Thank you.
Member Funk?
Yes, I do hear from a variety of people who are distressed about their experience in local businesses who either are not requiring masks on their property since it has become mandatory, or not requiring their employees to wear masks, or are generally uncooperative and unsupportive of the policy of wearing masks, whether we like them, irrespective of that, we don't, we're all really tired of this, but there are people who are raising objections to it, and making it uncomfortable for those who do wear masks. If people find themselves in a situation that they would like the city to follow up on, what's the most expeditious way for them to make this information known and to try to make a change so that we can create a healthier environment throughout our community?
So they can either email myself or the code enforcement officer. Our code enforcement officer is going out, like I said, and talking with those businesses. At this point, there's not a good way to contact individuals or things along those lines. We also, I'm looking at Chief Haley here. If a business asks somebody to leave for not wearing a mask, they can contact the police department to get assistance on that issue also.
Right, so if a business has someone to leave because they're not wearing a mask and the individual is uncooperative, the business can call the police for assistance.
Is that correct, Chief? I see some nodding.
Yes, okay. And if an individual is not given service because they are not wearing a mask, they need to go consult readytoslow.org and update the files. Or work with, and refresh their understanding that businesses are in fact allowed to not serve it.
That is correct. And businesses are in fact allowed to ask them to leave.
And I would also point out, if someone has a service that they need that they're not able to get because of the mask, can they call that general help number, readyslow.org? And I think the mayor mentioned that telephone number earlier, or might have. But can they call that general number and look for another way? If they need to get groceries and that grocery store won't serve them and they can't figure out how to accomplish it, et cetera, could they call to try and get assistance with negotiating?
Oh, absolutely. I would call readyslow.org. They have a lot of, they're much more well-versed in the law and what can be done. We also have people that are still volunteering and would like to help those that do need help, and maybe that shouldn't be out still with or with masks, and we can still provide some assistance to them.
Right, so there are a lot of ways to accommodate the needs of people who might not be able to wear a mask and might need some assistance other than forcing in the community. Thank you.
Not seeing any other council questions. We will open it up to public comment. There's nobody here present in the chambers. Luke, is there anybody on the phone wishing to speak on this item? None. I will ask if we received anything via email.
We did not.
All right, so we will go ahead and close this item, and thank you very much for your thorough report. We will now go ahead and move on to council announcements and committee reports. And why don't we start with you, Councilmember Newsom?
We have a design review committee that's going to meet tomorrow at 2 to go over potential hearing on the mini storage unit with Live Workspace. That's all I have to report.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Bourbeau?
Yes, two things. On July 8th, the IWMA, the Integrated Waste Management Authority, will hold its strategic planning session. at the courtyard by Marriott, if that is allowed under county rules at the time, as things could change. And that's very important because the board doesn't have I would say, a clear consensus on the purpose, mission, and the way the IWMA should approach things and do business. So this is a particularly important meeting. It's a particularly important meeting for the IWMA to have. And again, that's on July 8th. So that's important. Also, I sit on the League of California Cities Revenue and Taxation Committee. Had a over the phone type meeting that unfortunately I was traveling and got cut out at one point. But the key thing, one of the key things was a discussion of the proposition that'll be on the ballot in November regarding changing what's called split roll, so they would allow increased assessments of commercial property, not residential property, not on homeowners. And ultimately, the committee made no recommendation, and ultimately the full League of Cities in its meeting last week made no recommendation. There were motions both to endorse the proposition and to oppose the proposition, and both motions failed. So the League of Cities is taking no position on that at this time.
I'm curious with regards to IWMA, it does seem like there's been maybe a desire on the part of some lately to expand the role of IWMA maybe beyond what it was intended. I don't know if you have any information now for us.
Well,
on
I think
that.
it's a fair assessment that some folks, I kind of believe the IWMA should take a more activist role in terms of how it approaches diverting things from the trash. And in some cases, that might be through banning more things. And on the other hand, there's a great deal of concern about becoming a ban of the month club where, we ban one thing this month and then ban another thing that month. And looking back to the purpose of the IWMA, when the cities and the county signed on to the Joint Powers Authority, that the purpose, was to comply with state law on both reporting requirements, technical requirements, and on diversion requirements. And that is diverting the amount of trash that ends up in landfills. And so some folks think, kind of getting carried away in doing that. And other folks think, no, that's perfectly within that mission to divert things out of the trash flow. So I think there needs to be a real clear consensus on that for the IWMA to be and remain effective as a body, because I think there's some serious concern on the part of some folks that it might be overstepping its bounds, and which, in the extreme form could lead them to want to pull out of the agency in that.
Has there been any more discussion about potentially putting that under the county? Because right now, with IWMA, you have it's more than a 12-member body, correct?
It's a 13-member body because you have the 7 cities, 5 supervisors, and 1 representative of the special districts. So it's a 13-member body, which, as you can imagine, on a 5-member body, a 13-member body has a whole different dynamic.
Yeah.
Councilmember Fonzie knows that from being on the APCD, and you from being on SLOCOG, and and Councilmember Funk is on the HSOC, which has like 20 members or something. And so there was a discussion about a year ago brought forward while we had an interim director of whether or not it might be more effective to have the IWMA function carried out within the county, somewhere in county public works. And at the time, all 5 county supervisors thought that sounded like a very interesting idea, and all 7 cities thought it did not sound like a very good idea. So, so in that case, you can see that was not an ideological difference. That was more of a matter of the cities not feeling comfortable with turning that role over to the county. The county itself, or at least the board of supervisors, could certainly elect and has indicated desire to discuss their future role in the IWMA. That was brought up at the county supervisors meeting last week as to whether or not, although they gave it a no rush, a 6-month time frame to have a discussion about the county's role in the IWMA. So I think it's all the more important that this strategic planning session we develop a consensus as to what is the role and how it should go about its business when it does things. Perhaps maybe you need a supermajority to do certain things, let's say. I think there's certainly a lot of avenues for compromise, but that some consensus does need to be reached here, because right now we're in a mode where the differences are such that they need to be reconciled.
I think that can be the risk of a joint powers agreement too, is that, now you're one of 13 and trying to come to consensus. And if you have some that are, more activist and not going with that original intent, and certain communities get on with this original intent, and then suddenly that starts to change. I think that can be.
Those things can be addressed in how you structure the setup.
Yeah.
So
we'll see how that goes.
Councilmember
Bonson.
A slightly different question, but about the same IWMA. The rumors are going around that Governor Newsom or IWMA may bring back the reusable bags soon and ban stores from giving out the free plastic bags. Do you have any idea where we're at with the?
Well, it's sort of complicated, only because of confusion over what you had the governor at the beginning of this crisis temporarily suspended the statewide ban on reusable or non-reusable, disposable plastic bags. In his executive order, which by the way expired yesterday, and I asked today, and my understanding is it was not renewed. But even when he said that, he explicitly said that any pre-existing ordinance at the county or city level is not preempted, and therefore is essentially in effect. But of course, the stores, as I'm sure anybody going to the grocery store knows, in some cases they couldn't get paper bags. We talked about that. They were not available in the supply system, or they would rapidly run out. They they began handing out plastic bags, and they also put signs on the door saying, "Please don't bring in a reusable bag." And some question as to the logic of that, since you're pawing all the goods that you put on your in your grocery cart, and you put them on, you handle them personally and put them on the conveyor belt. So I'm not sure the effectiveness of that, or certainly not why you wouldn't allow people to bring in their own. But anyway, so stores went off and did this. So there was, we had it on the agenda to discuss what does that mean for the existing SLO County ordinance. But then we had a technical problem in that meeting wherein we found out one of the numbers on the call-in wasn't correct. So we kind of killed that before it got on got to that point of the discussion. And then because we were waiting to see what the governor would do, it was not addressed in our last meeting, because we figured, well, let's just see what the governor does. So yes, you have some folks who believe that because, well, certainly not because the governor's order is expired, but because any pre-existing ordinance is technically in effect, that the IWMA should be reminding stores of that. And then others feeling that, hey, this is the wrong time to go down that path. And because we haven't had a formal discussion on it, I can't tell you where the majority of the board is. I can tell you that there's definitely different people on different sides of that. And so I think we might end up with where the IWMA just remind stores, this is technically still in effect. You don't, the governor's order is also expired. But I mean, personally, I think it would be the wrong time for the IWMA to engage in any kind of enforcement beyond friendly reminder that, hey, you can go back to charging 10 cents for a bag, et cetera. But there's definitely, I think, some difference of opinion on what the best way to approach that is. And so the executive director is kind of in a bit of a pickle, I think, in terms of technically it's an ordinance, it's on the books, but I don't think there's a a strong desire to run out and beat people over the head. That's kind of best as I can summarize it without getting
Let's see, I've got Economic Vitality Corporation tomorrow. We're still meeting virtually. I had wanted to mention during the housing element, I forgot to, but at SLOCOG at our last meeting, we did adopt the regional, basically we talked about the regional early action program, the housing grant fund. And so of that money, we did vote to set aside just under $400,000, almost $399,000 to be used regionally. And that is something that could be used, say, for model ADU programs, something of that nature. And so it's kind of exciting to see this first step of, some potential regional collaboration of monies for multiple jurisdictions that would benefit. So that was some good news. And I did mention that we had to go out to bid again on the maintenance facility. And unfortunately, there's been more contesting of bids. And so whether or not we have a meeting on July 8th is still yet to be determined. But the bids that did come in, again, came in under what had originally been expected. So that is good news. But just the contesting of bids, we'll have to see how when we get to meet on that. Councilmember Fonzie.
Okay, I have Air Pollution Control District coming up on Thursday. And as Heather Newsom had mentioned, we have a design review, and this is what I'm calling mini storage part 2. This is the same area on Viejo Camino down by Santa Barbara Road that is proposed for revised mini storage with some shared office space included in a different design. And we are going to be reviewing it as a design review committee only as a design, but it will be coming back to the city council for the land use and permission or conditional use permit or whatever at a later date, depending on what design review proposes. A bit of a sticky wicket.
If I could ask further on that, one of the points of confusion about the process on that project in particular was that earlier stages, action by the design review under a very limited scope of review was interpreted as a positive action by the planning commission action, and then it went back to design review for additional comments, as I recall.
No, it's slightly different than it
Okay.
was. Design review said this wasn't the highest and best use of that area. They went on to planning commission and they approved it, and it would have gone forward without going to the city council had it not been appealed. So it's back.
Yes, okay. And that is tomorrow.
Tomorrow at 2.
At 2. And that will be held virtually. Zoom. Okay.
And I do just want to mention, the design review committee is allowed to look at general consistency with general plan policies and goals, along with some other things. We are working with Mr. Purick. We'll be talking to him in the morning to make sure that there is a lot of clarity, but the applicant did just ask for design review at this point.
That is what my report said. I was rather surprised at the limitations that were put on the design review group. So if we have different directions, we need to know it before 2.
Right, absolutely.
Roberta, I've already asked them to look into that as well, because I felt like it needed to have, didn't need to be put on design review at this point. So thank you for bringing that topic up again.
Sure. Okay. And then Homeless Services Oversight Council Executive Committee met this last week. Couple of news items. One, the Board of Supervisors did approve the grant applications for the COVID funds, various kinds, which support both TFS and ECHO. They're based here at Atascadero in their missions that serve both this community and people throughout the county. ECHO right now has a very active role in Paso Robles, in the homeless in outreach to homeless individuals, as well as into this to around Atascadero and in other parts of the county. So there, it's a very active process right now to try to deal with the COVID needs in this population. To date, no one in the unsheltered homeless community has been identified as having COVID. And we are really grateful to that. And a lot of people have worked hard in outreach to feeding programs and places where folks are to try to keep it that way. On other fronts, there is an encampments committee or task force that got derailed a bit by COVID because those needs were so sudden and so great. But they are coming back to meeting again. They've organized, they've got groups that are working. This is a county-wide effort to try to deal with the problem that we have. We see it in Atascadero, in the Salinas River, and Paso obviously does, and in various other places where there are concerns about the effect of the encampments on both the individuals in those encampments and on the community, including public health and water quality, and all kinds of, and where the camps are. And trash is a big issue. The county did not fund in its budget for this year a program called the Blue Bag Program, but we did discuss that at executive committee, and we're hoping that maybe that can continue, because it's a great pilot program that worked about dealing with the trash issue. These encampments do produce a lot of trash, and individuals have no place to get it picked up. And so there's that, and to handle things like sharps safely. And then last, I want to mention that we're familiar with the HEAP grants that were awarded. The HAP program, which is the sort of next round of funding, and which is a little bit differently structured, is probably going to come up for RFP in the fall. And HSOC has given some guidance to the folks involved to know what we're looking for in terms of projects there. On the HEAP funding, as you may recall, the big project in Paso Robles that is one of these navigation centers called the First Step Center. They have run into a problem with their site because Caltrans placed requirements that made it uneconomical. They are working very actively to get an alternative site established so that program can continue, because those funds have to be fully expended by the end of June of next year. And we are, of course, really eager for them to have this facility and this service so that folks who are hanging out in the riverbed and under overpasses and in other places can have a safe shelter that's better for them and better for the community. So that's hopefully within the next few weeks, or by early August, we'll have a better idea on that. If not, they're working on ways with the HEAP funding and HAP funding to be able to channel those funds to shovel-ready projects, so that we don't want to lose that money by not spending it, and we'll make sure that happens. Thank you.
Thank you. Good reports from everyone. And now we will move on. Do we have any individual determinations and/or actions? Seeing none, I think that means our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for joining tonight.
Good night.
Good night, Heather. Good night, Phil. Good night, Nick. Everyone else we can't see. Good night, all.
Good night.